that we can have our there we go. We can have our friends join us that aren't able to make the live. So happy Friday to you, right? You're a morning ahead.
Yes,
Is that correct?
that's right. I can tell you the future.
That's wonderful. Well, we were just talking about your book and just how life affirming and heartwarming and what a hug of a book it was. And it was so needed. So thank you.
My pleasure.
And congratulations on just your launch of this book. And it's been so fun to see the amazing reception that it's gotten, especially recently in the Washington Post. I saw that they had included it in a roundup of books for election
Yes,
stress and like how to take your mind off.
yes,
I'm like, this is great. This is a perfect book
yes,
for any stressful situation.
absolutely.
How has it been having your book finally out in the world?
It's been amazing. We actually recently got back from a trip to the US, so it was quite wild to see Fred in Manhattan, and yeah, in the Hamptons and in LA. That was a really, yeah, sort of pinched myself moment. It's been out here since July, so I'm sort of beginning to getting used to that.
Yeah.
But yes, it's been amazing. And I just feel, yeah, so incredibly grateful to be where I am.
That's wonderful. Well, it's been so fun to see yeah, all the accolades and like warm reception that it's gotten here stateside.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily get to see the Australian side of it, but that's nice that your launch was staggered a little bit, maybe for your travels.
Yes, definitely.
Aw. Well, to start us off, Yvonne and I will just ask a few questions and then we'll open it up to readers to ask questions, and Yvonne and I will moderate those questions for
Sure.
you, if that's all right. Just to start us
Absolutely.
off, we'll give you a softball here. Can you talk about the inspiration for The Borrowed Life of Frederick Fife?
Absolutely. So the inspiration for the novel began with the creation of the protagonist, Fred, who most of you will know was inspired by my grandfather, Fred, who was also my best friend. We were as thick as thieves. We had the same sense of humor. And we would just, we would always sit next to each other at family dinners. He began to lose his hearing a little bit towards the end. And so I would always sit next to him and make sure that he could hear everyone and, repeat anything if needed. And he was diagnosed with dementia. And so I originally was studying to be a doctor. I was in medical school, and I began to realize that it sort of really wasn't the career path that I wanted to go towards. I was very drawn to working with older people. And so I ended up changing course and I changed degrees. I developed a cooking program for older widowed men in the community. But when my grandfather was diagnosed with dementia, I changed again to be the social support coordinator in his nursing home so that we could spend more time together. And that was a really special couple of years. So we would have lunch together every day. And I would wheel him down the hall and we'd be belting out sort of Pirates of Penzance and our favorite show tunes. And it was amazing because, he never forgot the words to songs, but he never forgot his love for his family or his unconditional kindness. And so, yeah, his character was the inspiration. And it kind of grew from there. The plot is obviously very fictional. That didn't happen. But the love in the book is real. Oh, I've lost your audio there.
Oh, Kelly, you're muted.
There it is. Sorry. I could just hear through your pages your warmth and like deep care and affection for people as they age. That really came across
Mm.
in the story. And what a gift for your grandfather and, for you to have that
Oh,
special time together.
absolutely. And he and my grandmother, Dawn, So although their names went to the characters of Fred and Dawn, their story was very similar to that of Albert and Val, with my grandfather in the nursing home with dementia, and my grandmother coming to visit him, and all the challenges that brought. But they truly had a love story for the ages. They had one of those lifelong head over heel romances, and he would write poetry for her up until his early 80s. And when dementia, sort of stopped him being able to do that, I tried to become his pen. So we would sit in his room and I'd, pen some little notes, and he would sign what he could, so that he could, keep on loving her in the way that I knew that he really wanted to.
Mhm. That's so sweet. Melissa has a question actually about Albert and Val.
Yes.
Are you free to ask?
Yeah. Yeah, I loved their story.
Mm,
It was incredibly moving, and their whole wedding, where there was something. I volunteered at a nursing facility and have for about 12 years, and that whole idea of just like meeting them where they are and
mm,
entering into their story, is that so for Fred to be like, yeah, we're going to have this wedding,
mm.
and to go through all of that. Is that something that you saw happen? Is that something that you wished would happen? Where did that part of that come from? Because I love that.
Thank you so much. It's one of my favorite scenes too. So that came, I made that up. That didn't actually happen. It sort of came out of my heart. But yeah, I'm a hopeless romantic myself. And so I would always try to create opportunities for couples at the nursing home. And we had sort of like a little dance that we arranged, and where, partners were able to come in, and obviously there were not many residents that could actually dance, but they were sort of with their partner and had, some of the music that they liked. But yes, the wedding was fictional. We certainly had, I felt very privileged to care for a lot of residents that had dementia, and some of them would believe that, they were in a different decade. There was one lady who the entire time thought she was on a cruise ship. Um, which
That's
perhaps wouldn't
lovely.
be, I mean, maybe that's not the worst way to
Yeah.
be. So yeah, and certainly, yeah, not trying to, correct them, or, just as you said, meeting them where they're at, holding space for where they are, is also important.
Yeah, I love.
How did your role, Anna, as a activities coordinator in the nursing home shape you as a person, but then as a writer? How did that impact you? It clearly did.
Yeah, so uh, I think I felt very at home at the nursing home. So I'm a very old soul. And we're now talking about 15 years ago that I worked there. So I fear that if I went back, that the music taste would now be too modern for me. Because when I was there, it was, I grew up so close to all of my grandparents. Even my great grandfather used to live with us. And so I always had this rapport. And so I think working in the nursing home, yeah, it felt like I was meant to be there. And yeah, I really, really miss it, to be honest, as well. But I think being able to write about it was also a really special way of being able to reconnect with that part of my life, but also to, hopefully do a bit of advocacy for older people. I'm very passionate about the way in which older people are represented in the arts. And so I think that really did help shape my writing of this book.
That's so interesting. Can you talk about how you went from being, working there to 15 years later, you've published this novel? What was
Mm.
the in between like?
Yeah, so I got pregnant when I was at the nursing home, and yeah, my grandfather actually knew that I was pregnant. If we'd had a boy, he would have been called Fred, but we had a daughter. I was extremely sick during pregnancy, and so I had to take early maternity leave. I had hyperemesis. But then, and I always had wanted to stay at home when the kids were little, and I was very lucky to be able to do that. But then I had an injury after the birth of my second daughter and multiple surgeries, which meant I could no longer return to aged care, because even my job, even though I wasn't a nurse or a carer, it was still involve, pushing a lot of wheelchairs, and it was very physical sort of work. And so I stayed at home for that time. We did a lot of traveling with our kids, which we love, and we were so lucky to be able to do. I've been involved in the local theatre, which is where my love of storytelling comes from. And then it wasn't until the pandemic that in Melbourne we had I think we had the longest lockdown in the world. It was like 5 months or something crazy, and we were only allowed out of the house for 1 hour a day to exercise. You weren't allowed to go any further than I don't know what it is in miles, sorry, probably about 3 mile radius of your house. And we had the kids at home and homeschooling. And I'd always wanted to write. Like I originally, was very interested in playwriting and screenwriting, but I wanted to be able to really get into the characters' point of view and inner thoughts, which is much easier to do in a novel than a screenplay, unless you sort of have a cheesy voiceover of what's going on in their head. And I thought if I can write a really good novel, then maybe it will be adapted. So during the pandemic, I enrolled in a couple of very casual online writing courses, which was the biggest benefit of that was that I met other aspiring authors. And it's kind of like, I mean, I don't go to the gym, but I've heard that if you have an accountability partner, it's much easier to do those things. And so we sort of formed a writing group from that, and you would give feedback to other people about their work and also receive feedback. And that was a really good way of knowing how you're tracking, rather than just writing and sort of hoping for the best. You were constantly getting feedback, and also from a tutor who was a former editor. So that was really great, and that's where Fred was born, along with my sourdough starter called Fred,
Aw.
as many people did in the pandemic. And then, yeah, I certainly wasn't writing full time at that point. People often ask me, how long did it take to write? And it's a really tricky question to answer, because I sort of just did little bits and pieces, probably over the course of 2 to 3 years. But the more I wrote, the more I realized that I really, really wanted to do this, and realized that I wanted to, give it everything I've got towards the end. So began to decide to submit to, reach out to publishers and agents.
Hmm.
Quite the road. I see some good things did come out of COVID. I feel like we talked to so many authors where
Yeah,
something really struck them during that time. Yeah, that's
absolutely.
amazing. Look at you today.
Yeah, definitely. It changed my life, I guess. So,
Yeah.
and I have some yummy sourdough as well.
Yeah.
Aw. Do you feel like the found family trope? We were talking about this in our book club, as so many of us really loved that part of your story, and how Fred still had hope and connection and relationships. Do you feel like that found family aspect was something that you witnessed personally in the nursing home, or is it more of like an idyllic, state? What do you think?
I don't think that I did witness it. It was more of this sort of idealized state that, I really was very interested in the idea of redemption, and whether one man could sort of redeem another man's life even after death. And, that there were these kind of people that met by this bizarre twist of fate, but that they could be the thing that the other person needed. But in order for that to happen, obviously, there was that mistaken identity element that, and all the past story. So yeah.
It's really sweet. What does your own family think of this release with the
Oh,
book?
they're really delighted and yeah, very proud. My parents are very sweet. We all obviously wish that my Nana and Pa could have read it, which would have been amazing. But no, all very, yeah, very proud, very excited. My mum's really sweet. Like I think she's listened to the audiobook like an insane number of times.
Oh,
And they always want me to send any little, things. So yeah, no, they're all really delighted, and it's certainly a very unexpected plot twist of my life becoming an author. It wasn't sort of like that was all I wanted from the start or anything. So it's been a really, yeah, delightful surprise.
oh, Melissa said in the chat the audio was so well done.
Oh, that's good.
I
I'm
think
glad
that
you
can
enjoyed it.
really make or break an audio, a reading
Yeah.
experience, the audio narrator. And I think that that's so, so key when you can get a great audiobook narrator
Mm.
that really just brings the story to life.
Yes. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. The person that I wanted to do it is a really beloved Australian actor who's in his 80s. He's the same age as Fred. And he's my absolute favorite, but he didn't have the vocal stamina to be able to do because it's quite intensive to record an audiobook. So it is lovely to hear when I get that feedback because it makes me think, oh, it all worked out in the end anyway.
Yeah, definitely. Will you talk a little bit more about your writing process? You mentioned that you went through this kind of rigorous process of getting feedback throughout your
Mm.
drafts. Were there any major plot points that changed or any like pivotal revisions that you made?
Surprisingly, there wasn't really. So my writing process, it definitely stems from my love of theatre and film. And so, when most children were playing with Barbies and Legos, my best friend and I would write plays for hours and hours and hours, and we would perform them for our very patient parents and
Yeah.
grandparents. I'm pleased to say my writing skills have improved since I was 5. But yeah, that's really influenced the way I write. So I completely visualize, like I see it as a film in my head, complete with cinematic soundtrack. There are certain songs now that still just make me cry because I picture them in certain, scenes of the book. And I think the other part of my writing process is emotion. So I'm like, as my friends and family will tell you, I'm a real empath. But it doesn't only stop with real humans, it extends to my characters. So I feel very, very deeply, and I can often be found like weeping at the computer or laughing. My kids tease me. You're like, oh, mum, But for me, that's the best gauge of how my writing is going. So, like, if I'm crying, that's a good thing, and it's more meaningful for me than any plot point, or like not so much plot point, sorry, like word count, and those types of things. Yeah, certainly having the accountability helped. That sort of in that course, we sort of did the first 20,000 words. And then there was a small group of us who kept in touch afterwards. And when we had finished our books, we sort of sent it around and we read each other's, which was great. And yeah, just polished it to the best of, my ability before submitting.
In our book club chat, we were talking about one woman said she's not usually a crier, but this one got her.
Yeah, I've had a couple of people. I've had a couple of men say that, like
Oh,
a lot of men actually, like their wives have given it to their husbands, and they're like, I saw my husband crying, and you
oh.
know, um, and my husband cried reading it as well. So yeah, I'm really pleased that I mean that's the aim is to go away with aching sides and wet cheeks. So
mission accomplished. Um, Stephanie in the chat asked a question. She said, "Did you think that the story of a senior citizen would resonate with audiences the way that it has? Increasingly more stories are being written about older people who are vibrant, and it's wonderful."
Mm. Um, yes, I guess I I knew that Fred's kindness and his gratitude would be attractive regardless of his age. But I am pleased to see more books coming out. Um, there's still kind of this problematic thing in representation in the arts, in that many older people, particularly in film and television, but also in literature, are often only the hero if they can prove that they've still got it, that they can, we can think of, examples of films where like the old men are blasted into space, that the astronauts or old dogs or, and they're great stories, like what's it called? Frankie and Grace? Grace and Frankie? Can't remember that. Yeah. Um, but they're sort of, there's a lot of sort of valorization of people that have still got it, and this youth obsessed culture where or even like POMs, that there's a lot of stories about probably women in particular, that it's like, they're spotlighted because, oh, look, she can still turn heads, she can still wear stilettos, she can still do this. And so I really wanted to write a story where it's okay to be old, that it's, Fred doesn't like, he doesn't climb a mountain or, do anything particularly physically amazing. And he doesn't solve crimes or anything like that. But it was just that he was kind, and that and he did have aching knees and a leaky prostate, probably mentioned too many times. Um, but yeah, I'm really interested in those stories where older people are made the heroes of their stories, not because of what youthful traits they have, because I think it's so important that people, can be the heroes of their own stories, even if they can't do all the things they used to do. And there's also a big, like, my book is compared a lot to Harold Fry, which I absolutely love. But Harold is not old. I think, I've forgotten his age off the top of my head, but I think it's like late 50s or early 60s compared to 80. So it's like comparing a newborn protagonist with a 20-year-old protagonist. So it's very, very different. So yeah, I'm definitely keen on, spotlighting those in the later years.
Yeah, I think this year, really especially, there have been so many books come out with protagonists in their sunset years, like living
Mhm.
their best lives. And
Yeah.
we were talking in book club, like Mrs. Quinn's Rise to Fame, about the British Bake Off, or like British Bake Off, and then
Yes.
Claire Pooley's book, How to Age Disgracefully, and recently the Love Elixir of Augusta Stern. There's
Mhm.
been like a slew of these books,
Yes.
and they're all just seem to be hitting this spot with people that's really resonating. And most readers probably haven't gotten to that point of their life yet,
That's
and it's
right.
nice to look forward to that and to shine light on some of these areas and say like, hey, there's still like not only, hope, but really great, wonderful
Yeah.
things to come. And I think that we
Absolutely.
all need that.
Absolutely, because we live in that youth saturated culture where it's almost, we're told from, as teenagers even, to hide age. It's all about anti-aging, wrinkle fillers, hide, hide, hide. And so, yeah, I wanted a story where, it was sort of humanity in all its aging and, all its glory, not sort of shying away from those things.
Yeah, definitely. Michelle had a question about the side characters in the story, which were such a delight. Michelle, are you free to ask your question?
Hi, Anna. How are you?
Well, thank
Um,
you.
Thank you, Kelly, for telling me that I would fall in love with Frederick because that's exactly what I did when you told me months ago that I needed to pick up this book. My question was, I wasn't sure if it was an intentional device, but the way that you showed us who Frederick was by focusing on his relationship with the side characters and not
Mm.
necessarily telling us all of his traits, but showing us how he behaved with people that crossed in his path. I was just wondering if that was intentional and if you had a favorite side character that really hit the mark in terms of explaining to a reader what his core beliefs were.
Yes, that's a great question. Thank you. It was definitely intentional to show and not tell because I think it's a much yeah, it's a much better experience for the reader to really get deep into that, to be able to see it and not just told something. It's a much more vibrant sort of reading experience. And yes, my favorite side character is definitely Albert. I still cry over his death. Don't tell anyone that. Um, I do though, yes, there's this one song that it just gets me every time. But certainly I sort of wanted to show with Albert, yeah, Fred's compassion, and his kindness. And I think, there's a line in there that says the way that you treat someone with dementia, shows a lot about a person. And I think that's really true. And obviously Fred had the experience with his own mother, with dementia, and those were kind of the skills that I learned when I was in the nursing home. Those are what I passed on to the character of Fred, and I really wanted to show, yeah, his absolute kindness, in that. And then obviously, yeah, there's a array of side characters, but that was probably, yeah, 100% my favorite is Albert. Did that answer the question, or I might have forgotten something? Yeah, thumbs up.
Aw, that's wonderful. I'm curious, what your hope is for what readers take away from this story.
I would love to share a little bit of my grandfather's kindness to inspire that kindness. I think at the moment there's so much going on in the world that is not in our control. But I think all of us have the ability to be kind. And that's sort of what I really was interested in the protagonist too. Like, we won't all be solving crimes, we won't all climb Mount Everest, we won't, all do all these things, but to have a protagonist who has a skill that, it might be hard for us, but even if it can make one person do one kind thing, that would really, yeah, that's the whole spread the Fred hashtag, is trying to spread that kindness. I'm trying to, yeah, get that out there. And also, I think to shed a compassionate light on aging and dementia and grief, so that people, who are experiencing those issues can feel heard and seen, and that it can give readers a better understanding, of those spaces, and those challenges.
And also, I think missing our grandparents and missing parents too. Everyone can
Yes,
relate to that somehow. So I feel like that's like the magic
absolutely.
connection for so many people. And
Yes, a lot of people have said that, Fred reminds them of their father or their grandfather. And so, and I think that is why these books are, becoming popular, because I think those are very special. I mean, not for everyone, obviously, but yeah, a lot of people, do think of their grandparents fondly. And if they don't, they would have liked to. And so having that, that sort of, it's a comforting, read, I think, in that way.
One of the quotes, and you touched on this a little bit about grief. In the book, you wrote, "Grief was love with nowhere to go."
Mm.
You talk a little bit about that. I think that's so beautiful, and it's such a short sentence. Grief is love with nowhere to go. Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's that kind of thing of yeah, having something that I actually talk about a little bit about it in the second book that I'm writing, but it's almost like when you love someone, it's it's like sort of like a big glass and all of this love pours in, and suddenly the glass breaks and the liquid is still there. It just doesn't have, it's uncontained, and yeah, it's definitely how I felt about my grandfather and grandmother's passing. Um, and it's because though I loved them so much that the grief is so great.
Mm.
If a stranger dies, you might, think, well, that's sad. But when you love someone, yeah, that love is still there. It's absolutely still there. And that's why you feel the pain, because you don't have that person to tell and to show your love to as you did before.
Mm. See, Jessica in the chat said, I love the idea of promoting acts of kindness. Every
Yes,
year,
please spread it.
yes. She said, every year my friend Holly hosts Hope Days in memory of her sister Hope. And it runs from May 1 to May 13, and everyone in the group identifies opportunities for acts of kindness, big and small. Of course, we want to create kindness all year round, but it's nice to have this time where we all come together and focus on doing things in memory of Hope.
I love that. That's so beautiful.
It's like
Absolutely. Yeah.
spread the Fred, just like
It's
spread
spread
the.
the Fred. Please spread the Fred.
Aw. Aw. And then Melissa said, I also loved how Fred described how to keep the love alive by filling up the one you love, and when they are filled, they can give it back.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was very much what my grandparents did, and what I tried to bring into my own marriage, was that sort of cyclical, yeah, filling of tanks, and
Yeah.
being able to love someone because yeah, in return. So
Hmm. Cindy said in the chat too, so happy to hear that you're writing another book. Any sneak peeks? Are you able to share anything that you're working on or not yet?
yeah, I can tell you, yeah, just sort of a little taste
Yeah.
of. So it's about a man called Griff, who is in a nursing home. He's a retired Michelin star chef.
Mm.
Um, Unlike Fred, he's a bit of a curmudgeon. He is is widowed. He is very depressed, and he wants to depart this earth. So he's come up with this death menu, which is ways in which to take his own life, and he just has to decide by Friday. But determined to not let the nursing home mush that they serve him be his last meal, he breaks into the nursing home kitchen and begins to cook. And that sparks this sense of joy, and memory and connection with other residents. And it's a whole unexpected change of events. So it starts off a little darker than Fred, but it's very much, yeah, up in the same tone. So
Yeah, kind of uplifting fiction and yeah.
yes, yes. And I don't know about over there, but lately food in nursing homes has been a big area of interest over here. So one of our most
Oh.
beloved chefs, her name is Maggie Beer. I think she's just about to turn 80, but she has sort of done this mission where she's gone into nursing homes to try and improve the quality of the food. Because certainly it's at a very low standard in many places. And so it's sort of building on that idea that this Michelin star chef gets into the kitchen, and begins, and then when residents are served beautiful, food prepared with love, how that can change things. So, and I love cooking. So, and I get to try all this delicious food and
Oh
call it research.
yeah. That is such a cool concept. I don't know if we have such a movement here in the
Mm,
US as far as the nursing home food
mm,
goes. But I would love that. There is there's a old psychiatric hospital in northern Michigan, like almost to Canada. And
Hmm.
now it's been turned into like lofts and a restaurant, but you can still tour the old building. And this was, 100 years ago or even 50, like it kind of spanned for a long time, but they served some of the psychiatric residents. They believed that beauty was healing, and so they would always have fresh flowers on the table, and they would serve the residents on like the nicest finest china, and
Yeah,
had like food that they grew. The residents would grow, they had a garden and all of these things, and so it's kind of that same concept that like food is life, and it's
it is.
life-giving, and it
Yeah,
can
and it's
bring
dignity.
connection. And it's not just to sustain your body, but it can be, so much more than that and beautiful.
Absolutely, and it's totally about dignity as well, and invisibility in the older people as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm
Is there
looking forward.
legislation in Australia right now that's working on changing these, or is it just kind of a social movement that is
It's sort of
happening?
it's a social movement. We did have like an investigation into aged care in general a couple of years ago, and there were some quite disturbing findings from that. And I think it's the same over there, that there are some homes that are wonderful, but there's
Right.
others that, the staff are just not in it for the right reasons, and the minimum of care is provided. And so, yeah, the nursing home where Griff is sort of the most negligent nursing home in Australia, basically. So the food they're getting is just awful. But yeah, it's there are certainly steps being taken, but we still need to do a lot more, I think, as the baby boomers,
Right.
begin getting towards that stage of life. I'm really, yeah, passionate about the idea of dementia villages. I'm not sure if you've heard about
Oh,
those. Um, they started in Scandinavia, where many good things seem to start, but they are popping up here and there. But they're this village that are tailored for residents with dementia, where they can live, and they can roam around freely in this mini community safely. There are shops where they can wheel a trolley and they can buy things. It doesn't matter if they have the right money or understand the payment. There are gardens and there's restaurants and cinemas where residents can go, and all the staff are obviously trained. But one of the best things about it is that anyone from the community that even doesn't have a loved one living there can go and eat at the restaurants or can go to the cinema there. And so there's this exposure to dementia, and it becomes normalized, and people gain compassion and understanding from being around those there. And the outcomes for these residents are so much higher and better than those, because normally in a dementia wing of a nursing home, it's very locked, it's
yeah.
very, limited. And so this is a beautiful model that I hope we see more of here and in the US and everywhere.
Hmm. Wow. That does sound so different from many models here.
Mm,
My grandpa just lived in a, lockdown facility for dementia for years, and his mental health, you could just see it slowly just start to decline and decline, because he didn't want to go down for the meals because nobody talked, and nobody talked
yep,
because they
yep.
didn't have any context or anything to share. And
Mm,
they had, surely they had things to share, but just within the confines of their small community, like it just was hard to get to know people. But like if you're in a more natural environment and walking around and doing some of these
absolutely.
things, that's so
Yeah.
so beautiful. I love
Yes.
that. Oh, I love Melissa. That's what the old malls can turn into.
Yes. Good idea.
Melissa, you've got something there. I love that. That's really, really cool.
That would
Um,
be awesome.
is there a publication date? Somebody, I'm looking in the chat, um, for your upcoming book, or is it just a work in progress with?
So it will be 2026,
Okay.
but they haven't set an exact date yet.
Okay.
So I think probably the first half of 2026, but we'll see. Nothing official yet. So
Will it be the same publication date for your Australia release and your US release, or will they stagger it
uh,
again?
I think it will be slightly staggered, but probably not as big a gap as
Okay.
it was time. Yeah, because it all happened very quickly, the whole publishing part of it. So that was kind of the way it turned out. But yeah, this time obviously they had more time. So yeah.
We could plan ahead a little bit. Okay. And somebody else in the chat asked, what books are you currently reading or recommending?
Oh, there's so many. And I'm, one of those people that have the TBR and like I have an audiobook on the go and then another one. I'm trying to think of ones that are published over there because quite a few that I've read recently are Australian authors that are not out in the US.
That's okay.
Uh,
You can share that too. We love that. That's when we had
yeah.
Emma Gray on for the last Love Note last year, and she had
Yes, she's my
recommended.
yes, I'm like we haven't met in person, but we talk all the time online and we have the same Australian publisher. So
Oh yeah, so we hosted Emma.
yeah.
Um, was it maybe it was the beginning of this year, I believe, and she had recommended Karen Maine, who wrote,
Mhm.
yeah, Lenny
She
Mark's.
lives 5 minutes from me,
Oh,
and
she does. Oh,
yeah, and her quote is on the Australian book. Yeah,
oh,
so Karen
fun.
and I are friends.
Oh, fun. So yeah, she
Yeah.
recommended Karen, and Karen's book wasn't out yet, but it kind of put it on our radar. So if you've got any Australian
Yes.
authors, we
Well,
would
I
love.
do have one. Jane Tara wrote Tilda is Visible, and
Yeah.
that is coming out with Crown. I think it's in February of next year in the US. It's already out here. She and I went to New York together because Fred and her book Tilda were chosen for Zibby Owen's most anticipated reads.
Hmm.
Um, and that's a great book club book
Yeah.
because it's a really quirky premise. It's about the invisibility that women feel as they age. But the premise is that basically this woman literally starts to disappear, like her little finger, begins to disappear. So it's a quirky, fun premise, but it is very, very insightful into mental health and the importance of not losing ourselves and the importance of female friendships. Yeah, so Tilda is Visible. I would highly recommend. Uh, the other beautiful one is 100 Years of Lenny and Margot. Some of you may have read that. I read that recently. It's so beautiful. Absolute tearjerker, again with an older character and sort of there's a 17-year-old and this older woman who sort of meet. It is very sad, but it's beautiful. They meet in a hospital and they're both sort of terminal, but they put together, this, I won't go into it too much, but yeah, very tear-jerking book. I also just read The Hit Woman's Guide to Reducing Household Debt. I do
Oh,
not normally read crime. Um, I think this book will make it to America. It's actually by a debut author friend, but it's very different to Fred. It's basically a crime, but yes, it's about a hit woman turned mother. And yeah, so if you like crime, that's a good one. I'm trying to think. There's so many. The 100. Oh no, what is it? The Happiest Man on Earth. Have you read that? That's a memoir. That's a
oh
beautiful
yeah.
story of a man who survived the Holocaust. And, he's like Fred. He's like, even despite what he has been through, he considered himself to be the happiest man on earth. That's, yeah, a really beautiful one.
We were talking about the 100 Years of Lenny and Margot before you came on, so that's
Ah,
that you mentioned that one.
yeah, it's beautiful. It's really beautiful.
And I did read Tilda is Visible. It's not
Oh,
out yet,
you
but I
did?
got sent an ARC, and
Yeah,
yeah, it
nice.
was it was a quick read, and it was really like quirky, like you said, and thought-provoking.
Yes, fun.
And yeah.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep, very good. Good. I'm glad you mentioned that one. Well, does anyone have any other questions? I'm just looking through the chat to make sure. Oh, Chelsea said, I love a book that draws me in immediately. Did you know this story would start with the hilarious start that it did?
Uh, I'm trying to remember if I did. I think that was early on, very early on in the writing process. Yes. That little event came to mind. I personally don't have a huge problem with suspension of disbelief because I like reading fiction for that reason. So even though it's unlikely to happen, I love that books can make anything happen. So I wanted it to be, obviously, when you think too hard about it, it's a pretty awful thing, but I wanted to try to keep it as light as possible, and a little bit humorous rather than it being like a really grim dead body scene. So yes.
Oh. And Melissa said, where did the physical humor come from? And Melissa is the one who volunteers in the nursing home. And she said that in our book club that that kind of rang true to her as well from her
Do
experience.
you mean sort of like the potty humor or the
Yeah.
like the more, yeah, well, I guess, I don't know. I think my grandfather, that was his sense of humor. And my dad is very much, that was kind of how we grew up. So probably that influenced it a lot. But again, I really wanted to write a book that was human, that did have farts and did have aching knees and leaky prostates and whatever. Yeah, and so that's kind of I didn't want to hide anything. Like I wanted it to all be on display because all of the physical issues that happen there are issues that men and women face as they age. And so, yeah, for some people it was maybe a little bit heavy-handed. And it did. I think a few of you read the what do you call it there? A galley.
Yeah.
And so a bit of it did get taken out, but there's still plenty in there. But yeah, basically, I just wanted to write humanity in all its glory, and those issues are things that happen all the time in nursing homes. Yeah, so keep it
Yeah.
real.
Definitely. And we were talking too, like if you're older, sometimes maybe it's hard to reconcile that your body is changing and these things are happening. And
Yeah.
I think humor can be a really great coping mechanism for people. And if you're able to laugh about the fact that, or joke about the fact that something weird just happened with your body, then great, more power to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, Shanna was wondering what changed from the arc to the finished copy. You mentioned that maybe like some of the physical humor was scaled back a little or
Yeah, a little bit. I think it was just all tightened a bit. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I can't remember exactly. And then I think the epilogue was expanded on a little bit, but mainly just that kind of line to line tightening. Yeah, removing a few of the physical jokes. But yeah, mainly kind of just polishing at that stage. Nothing major, but just a much kind of tighter read, hopefully. Yeah, but it did all happen very quickly. So yeah, it was an intense time with the editing.
Sure. Okay, yeah. Shanna said I read the arc and now I want to read the final ending.
Yeah.
Me too. I read the arc
I
too.
don't think it's
Me
changed.
too.
I think there might have just, yeah, I'll have to double check. Because I also had the Australian arc and the American arc, and they were different. And then, yeah, my office is like full of these arcs. But I don't really have anyone to give the American ones to. So, um, yeah, because it was Americanized for the version you have.
Yeah.
There were quite a few changes there.
Oh,
We've had
interesting.
authors even say that the last line was changed. Remember, Ethan Joella said
Oh,
that
yeah.
I was like, that is such a big thing from the art to the finished copy sometimes. You never know.
And that made a difference for the ending of his book. So,
Yes,
Ah,
um,
yes,
yes, yes.
so it how it was interpreted, but it sounds like
right.
yours kind of
No,
stayed.
it was more like changing we to pee. So like we were all having a giggle at the single drop of pee made a pitiful splash. That was how it is in the opening line. Yeah, so there was some fun conversations. I have a friend. We used to live in LA, and I have a friend there, and she and I had these lengthy discussions about all these Australian endearing insults, and there were not a lot of American equivalents. It was interesting to have that cultural discussion, and we're having the same discussion with the next book because there's certain words that I would love to keep, and to to spread. But yeah, it's that balance of not making it disjointed for a US reader, like not knowing what a word is, and then you have to stop and look up. Like it's about making it a smooth read. So that is important too.
I'm curious about all the Australian slang. I would love that.
Yeah, I
And
can put together a list.
yes, Mary Ellen said the audio was the Australian book, which didn't match her American physical book. So that's interesting.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe you should just like push for your Australian terms in the US copy, but then have like a glossary in the back of
Yes,
your
I think so.
Australian insults.
Yeah. 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 There's some good ones.
I know, no, I'm so curious. There was one other question that Stephanie was wondering, do you know when you're writing your book, do you know the ending in advance or does it occur organically? So like are you a pantser or a plotter?
Uh, so that's a great question. I would say that I find it very important to have certain structural points in place, which is normally kind of, the start, the 1/4 mark, the middle, 3/4, and then the ending. So I have those points in place. The ending, I write quite early on because I really, want to keep that as my kind of true north of where we're progressing to. But definitely in between those points, it's pantsing. So like seeing where the characters take you. Yeah, because you'll just often have these little thoughts and, to add into different sections. But yeah, the ending I think is, obviously hugely pivotal to a book. And so for me, I couldn't do it as sort of an afterthought. Like it has to be part of the initial planning process.
Yeah, that makes sense. We hear from so many different authors how they can do things a little bit differently. And I would say, I don't know, I should probably keep track, but I feel like it's like 50-50. Like some are like, oh
Yeah,
no, I just like see where the characters take me. I'm like,
yeah,
how? How would you do
yeah,
how would you do that?
yeah,
Like, well, how do you not have a
yeah,
huge whiteboard of like where things are?
yeah.
So it's interesting to hear different authors,
Yeah,
how they
I'm
go about this.
50-50, so I think, yeah, but probably mainly pantsing, but just with those key
The
points.
key points. Yeah.
Yeah, just the really dot points. Like the
Yep.
wedding, for example, was, like that was a key event.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Any other questions? I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything in the chat. Hmm. I think I got everything. Um, Ivana, I don't know if you're free to take pictures with the book.
Yes, I'm sorry I had to have I have a sick kiddo and nobody else is home to help me.
Oh,
You just
hope
took
you
away
feel
from
better soon.
We're gonna take a photo. Yes, let's take our pictures. We've got,
I've got one too, actually.
oh, great. This one.
That.
All right, ready? I'll count us down. All right, 1, 2, smile. Oh, that's great.
Thank you.
We'll get that picture to you too. And this was
I
just
love that.
so lovely to hear all your thoughts and ideas and so special.
And thank you so much too. I know that many of you have, posted about the book or left a review on Goodreads. And I just wanted to say how much that means. Like it's a tough market out there at the moment. And so doing all of those things really does help to support authors, but also to spread the Fred. So I really, really appreciate that.
Well, Anna, this was so wonderful speaking with you, and we're so thrilled for you, and congratulations on such a fantastic book. And we will be so excited to see what comes next for you.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute honor to be here.
And
Enjoy
happy
your
Friday to you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's like 95 degrees here at the moment.
Oh
So
Oh,
my,
yeah.
wow.
Wow.
yeah, it's fun.
Okay. Well, enjoy the
Enjoy.
day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Anna.
Bye.